How's going guys, welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto was the Xenomorph and got harem? Part 3. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. Slowly exhaling with a quiet hiss, Naruto stayed where he was, his arms still outstretched from the strike. Straightening back out, he stared at the remnants of the log-turned training post that he had just smashed to pieces in a single blow, before staring down at his arm. From his knuckles to his elbow, his right forearm was covered in a thick coating of hardened semi-translucent gray resin that flared out not unlike a true Queen Mother's carapace, creating a sort of shield that reached up to his shoulder with his arm down at his side. It was his first personally created technique utilizing his own unique element, Jushitin. Tsukabudo. It was both offensive and defensive, the extra weight of the resin giving him a far stronger punch than normal, while doubling as a shield, the resin having hardened to the point of being like stone or metal. Still hard at work, I see. Haku teased lightly with a warm smile as she sauntered into the small clearing he'd been training in since dawn, it being closer to mid-morning by then. Walking up to him, she didn't hesitate to capture his lips in a sensual kiss, slipping her tongue into his mouth as she lovingly caressed his cheek with one hand. Letting his left hand rest on her hip, Naruto returned the kiss for a few seconds before they finally broke apart. Turning her attention to the resin-formed object on her life mate's arm, Haku couldn't help smiling as she ran a hand across its smooth surface. Looks like it's finally complete. Yeah, it only took me 2 months to do it. Naruto grumbled quietly, having hoped to get the technique combat ready in only a month, but it had been tough trying to provide enough resin to create the shield and have it harden immediately after at the same time. The more resin involved, the slower it hardened. Now that he'd figure out the key to doing so, he hoped his other ideas went a little smoother. Pulling away from Haku, he gripped his right wrist with his left hand before squeezing hard, causing the resin to crack before shattering completely, the entire shield-like object of resin breaking apart into countless pieces. What brings you out here? I was getting a little bored and decided to come see how you were doing. That's all. Haku answered with a slight grin, though a little dishonestly. She knew that he could sense her pheromones. There was no way he didn't know what she really wanted. It was quite literally impossible for him not to. Pressing up against him as she wrapped her arms around his neck and shoulders, Haku smiled seductively at him as she leaned in close, licking his throat lovingly. Feeling him shiver slightly as her potent pheromones hit him fully, Haku's smile only grew more alluring as Naruto wrapped his arms around her, his hands resting on her rear. I figured you might be able to help me find something to do. Is that so? He mumbled quietly before nuzzling her cheek, grinning slightly. It had been a while since they'd last mated, after all. I think there's something you can do back at the hive. I'm sure there is. She mumbled quietly before forcing him to lean down slightly, capturing his lips hungrily as she forced her tongue into his mouth. Forced to break the kiss after only a couple seconds as she gasped pleasurably, Haku could only hiss quietly as she felt his hands roughly grip her rear before lifting her up, prompting her to wrap her legs and tail around him as she got back to kissing him. Keeping his dorsal tubes raised to keep from running into anything or getting caught by surprise by any of the oversized and dangerous wildlife that inhabited the forest of death, Naruto started heading back to the hive with his life mate in his arms. So, I noticed that you've been spending a lot of time with Naruto lately. What's the deal with that, huh? Hayatari remarked teasingly with a grin, his face mask pulled down around his neck as he ate one of the last dango off the skewer, the two having met up for lunch at a dango shop that they frequented often. Almost immediately, Shinobu nearly choked on the tea she'd been in the process of drinking, her cheeks burning from behind her coat's high collar as she looked away for a moment, needlessly adjusting her sunglasses out of nervous habit. I don't know what you're talking about, Shinobu lied pitifully, her stuttering giving her away like it almost always did. Snickering, Hayatari took a drink of his own tea. We've just been training together in our SP spare time. The Hokage drawled out sarcastically with another teasing grin, only for a couple of Shinobu's Kakeichu to fly out from her sleeve and start buzzing around his face. Shying away and lightly swatting them away, Hayatari figured it was best to stop before he really upset her. Okay. I'll stop. Geez. Satisfied that she was no longer being teased, Shinobu silently recalled her insects while taking another sip of her tea, her hidden cheeks still burning hot with embarrassment. If Hayatari knew, that meant Kuranai most definitely knew as well. Of the two, their sensei was more observant and attentive to little details. Thinking of Naruto, though, Shinobu decided to pay him and Haku a visit later, since it had been their day off from missions and training. She wanted to know if he'd finally finished the technique he had been working on for the past couple months. Well, that among other things. You're buzzing again. Hayatari teased, referring to how Shinobu's Kakeichu had a tendency to start buzzing noticeably within the confines of her trench coat whenever she was thinking about Naruto and Haku. Blushing heatedly again at being caught, Shinobu took another drink of her tea while simply kicking the wide-eyed teen in the shin under the table. Ow. Alright. I get it. Hello. Shinobu greeted as one of the warriors came out of hiding near the cave entrance, calmly walking up to her on all fours as it neared mid-afternoon. Smiling slightly, she reached out and gently patted on the head. They'd all come to recognize her as a friendly not long after her first visit to the hive, some having even taken to escorting her out of the forest whenever she would leave to protect her from any of the local predators. She could only assume it had been because of either Naruto or Haku. Continuing on as the warrior returned to its self-appointed guard station, Shinobu entered the main chamber, forced into removing her trench coat shortly after like she always was by the hive's humid air. Leaving it draped over her shoulder, Shinobu tried spotting as many of the Xenomorphs as she could, knowing there was always at least 24 in the main chamber. However, they blended in so well with the resin and the dim light provided by the skylight air vents in the ceiling that it was nearly impossible to find them all. Only managing to spot a little under a dozen this time, Shinobu shook her head slightly as she reached the tunnel that led to the nest Naruto and Haku stayed in. Pausing at the animal furs that covered the far end of the tunnel, Shinobu knew better than to just walk in, having learned that the hard way on her second visit to the hive, Haku had been naked and burdened with her third brood at the time. Hello? Naruto? Haku? She called out before hearing something from inside. You know you can just come in, Shinobu-chan. Haku called from inside, prompting the Aburami heiress to brush aside one of the animal hides and step into the chamber. Leaning back against the ridge of furs that lined the wall at the back of her nest, it was apparent to Shinobu that Haku was naked due to the pale gray and white wolf fur draped over her body. They'd probably mated quite recently, judging by the distinct mound under the wolf hide where Haku's stomach was located, the hybrid queen mother pregnant with her sixth brood. This is just as much your home as it is ours, you know. And yet I've only stayed the night a handful of times in the past 2 months. Shinobu countered as she took her sandals off at the edge of the nest, leaving her coat with them as she made her way over to where Haku was. In the past 2 months, the chamber had undergone a number of renovations. In the back corner opposite of the nest was a rather decent-sized pool of clean crystal clear water with a couple skylights in the ceiling above it to let rainwater collect in the basin. Back near the chamber's entrance, Naruto had started a collection of different scrolls, weapons, tools, and various other items, such as glass jars filled with various kinds of herbs and other things he'd taken to dabbling in different things in his spare time. One of which was herbology, having been trying to make an herbal contraceptive for Haku so that she didn't suffer from overly large broods. On the other side of the entranceway, Haku had made a smaller nest for herself that she used whenever it came time for her to give birth, not wanting to make a mess of her bedding. Come here. Haku cooed softly as Shinobu sat down beside her. Not giving her the chance to resist, she leaned over and cupped Shinobu's cheek, slipping her tongue into the Aburami's mouth with a sensual kiss, just like she did every time she visited them. Cheeks flushing, Shinobu could only let it happen, fighting the urge to moan quietly as she started to return it slightly. Breaking apart after a few seconds, Haku smiled lovingly at her while using the inner thumb on her hand to gently clean off the bit of saliva from the corner of Shinobu's mouth. How have you been? I haven't seen you all week. I've been alright. My father's been teaching me more of our clan techniques, so I've been kind of busy. Shinobu answered as she tried to distract herself from the kiss's arousing side effects. She was still on the fence about being so intimate with Haku, but it was still incredibly hard for her to resist the hybrid woman's advances sometimes. Well, more than just sometimes. And Haku was persistent with it. Where's Naruto? He'll be back eventually. He left to do some hunting to restock our food stores since we were running a little low. Haku explained before suddenly letting out a quiet groan, a hand going to her covered abdomen, her womb already large enough for her to be mistaken for being full term with triplets. Shinobu knew it to be their serpentine young, however. Letting out another hissing moan as she winced faintly, Haku started to gently rub her enlarged womb. The new contraceptive we tried wasn't as effective as we'd hoped. If anything, it feels like it made things a little worse. I've never grown this large so quickly. May I? Shinobu stuttered slightly as she made the request, gesturing towards Haku's belly. Smiling at her, Haku nodded before uncovering herself, though for Shinobu's sake, she kept her lower half covered. The girl was simply too shy and innocent about some things, but Haku felt that it suited her. Shinobu had always seemed like a rather reserved girl to her since they'd first met. Still, if she was to be joining them properly, she would have to let go of some of that innocence of hers. Ignoring the sight of Haku's 4 engorged E-cup breasts, Shinobu gently laid her hand on the pregnant hybrid's belly, feeling her growing brood squirming restlessly inside of her. The first time she'd seen it, Shinobu had been a little too weirded out, but it now being the third time she'd seen Haku pregnant, Shinobu had eventually warmed up to it and was honestly a little fascinated with how many Haku usually gave birth to and other things about her pregnancies. Such as the insanely short gestation period which ranged anywhere from a few hours for a smaller brood to almost a full day for the larger ones. "Come here, will you? You always sit so far away from me." Haku grumbled with mock annoyance as she pulled Shinobu over to her, making the girl blush as she found herself shoulder to shoulder with the pregnant queen mother. Gently taking hold of Shinobu's hand, Haku set it back on her womb with her own resting over top of it. Smiling lovingly again, Haku draped her other arm across Shinobu's shoulders. Using Shinobu's slight embarrassment to her advantage, Haku made her look towards her before leaning in, capturing Shinobu's lips in another tongue-filled kiss, only with a touch more lust and hunger in it than before. Unable to resist it this time, Shinobu moaned softly into Haku's mouth, the pregnant queen mother easily dominating her as she started returning the kiss wholeheartedly for the very first time. Intoxicated by the liquidized pheromones that saturated Haku's saliva, Shinobu couldn't fight it anymore, another quiet moan escaping her as her free hand started inching closer and closer to her crotch. Letting go of Shinobu's hand as she finally started to break her, Haku reached over to gently grope one of the young woman's plump cup breasts through her top. Starting to rub herself through her pants, Shinobu started getting lost in lust and pleasure, moaning a little louder into the kiss than before as Haku squeezed her left breast. Mm. Haku smirked faintly against Shinobu's lips as she wrapped her tongue round the young woman's, purposefully filling her mouth with a little more saliva to get her more worked up. If there was one thing Shinobu needed to learn, it was about how sexually active she and Naruto were. While she and her life mate hadn't started mating semi-regularly until just recently, she had no doubt that it would be no different for Shinobu and Naruto once they reached such a level of intimacy between them. Ah. Shinobu moaned into Haku's mouth before breaking away, gasping for breath as she started getting too worked up, her eyes shut in ecstasy, as Haku simply pulled down Shinobu's turtleneck collar before latching onto her neck, sucking on the tender flesh there. Biting down on her bottom lip, she desperately tried to fight it, but she couldn't. Almost frantically undoing her pants, Shinobu shoved her hand down her pants and started fingering herself, blissfully ignorant of Haku's victorious smirk against the side of her neck. Being a reserved female, Haku had a feeling that Shinobu wasn't the type to pleasure herself under normal circumstances, but once she got worked up enough, she would go right for it. Ha Haku. Simply detaching from Shinobu's neck, Haku started pulling the young woman's top off, something Shinobu paused in her masturbation to assist with. While she sat up more to take her shirt off, Haku reached over and made Shinobu move so that she was facing away from her, only to pull her back so that she was leaning back against Haku's side. Tilting Shinobu's head back, Haku didn't waste time as she forced her tongue into the Aburami girl's mouth for a hungry lip lock. Before she could reach back down between her legs, Haku had already beat her to it, whimpering moans quickly following as she was fingered by the queen mother. Breaking the kiss after a few seconds, Haku decided to play a little dirty, guiding Shinobu's mouth to her lower left nipple, gasping softly as the girl immediately started to suckle. In small amounts, her milk would only enhance Shinobu's sexual bliss, something Haku wanted to do with the intention of maybe breaking the girl out of her shell fully when it came to her and Naruto. Feeling her buck against her hand, Haku leaned her head down with a bit of effort before sucking on Shinobu's throat and fondling the young woman's right breast. It wasn't long before Shinobu's soft whimpering moans started getting louder and more desperate, no doubt on the verge of experiencing one of the biggest orgasms in her life so far, if not her first real one altogether. Eyes glazed over with the euphoric effects of Haku's breast milk, Shinobu detached from her still swollen breast with a gasp, only to start squeezing and massaging with her other breast, still desperately bucking her hips against Haku's fingers. "Ah Haku. Fa faster. Please." She begged, holding the back of Haku's head to her throat as the queen mother continued to suck on her throat. Getting what she asked for, Shinobu's eyes shot open before rolling into the back of her head with a loud raunchy moan of pure bliss as her body started to spasm with her climax. Desperately sucking in air to refill her lungs, Shinobu simply laid there, her body limp and boneless as she bathed in the afterglow of it all, a dark and sensitive hickey staining the cream-colored flesh of her throat. Simply too exhausted from her orgasm, Shinobu's eyes slowly closed as she passed out, leaning back against Haku's side. Slowly moving out from under her, Haku eased Shinobu down on the bed of furs before shifting her position, stripping the girl out of her soiled pants and underwear. She'll clean them up while she was still able to move. "That's my girl," Haku whispered proudly with a smile as she leaned down to tenderly kiss Shinobu on the forehead, covering her now naked body with the wool fur she'd previously been using herself. Slowly getting up with a bit of effort due to her gravid belly, Haku brought all of Shinobu's clothes over to the pool of water before easing herself into its naturally chilled waters. "Why do you keep trying so hard to corrupt her?" Naruto remarked from the chamber's entrance as he set his satch-like weapon pouches on one of the shelves amongst his collection of things, the stench of sex heavy in the air. Glancing over at him, Haku simply smiled as she started cleaning up Shinobu's pants while Naruto walked over to sit at the edge of the pool. It wasn't the first time he'd caught Haku doing something with Shinobu while he was gone, and it probably wasn't going to be the last time, either. I have no idea what you're talking about. Haku blatantly lied with a smirk, only making Naruto sigh heavily before kissing the top of her head. Please don't make a habit of this. Naruto grumbled quietly as he turned his attention towards the slumbering young woman. I actually like her how she is. I know, but that doesn't mean I can't have my own fun with her, now does it? Haku countered, getting another sigh from Naruto. Still smiling as she finished with Shinobu's pants, Haku moved on to the young woman's underwear. So, how'd the hunt go? Tracked down that group of tigers that's been roaming around the area recently. Took 2 of them down and chased the others off. Naruto answered casually even though he was talking about the massive 15-foot-tall tigers that used to be at the top of the food chain in the Forest of Death. Actually feeling a little tired, Naruto yawned slightly. There's plenty of food now. Should hold us over for the next week, so long as we're careful. I might start taking the hunting parties elsewhere. I don't want to overhunt the forest. We'll manage. I know we will. Haku reassured faithfully, confident in her king father's judgment. Seeing him yawn a second time, however, she nudged him slightly. Go. Rest. I'll be fine. HSSS, just don't go too far if you leave the nest, okay? Naruto requested, causing Haku to scoff slightly before starting to stand up, finished with cleaning Shinobu's clothes. You really think I'm going far when I'm already this big? Haku grumbled as she held the side of her belly. Draping the clothes over a wooden pole set up on the wall nearby to dry, Haku felt like a nap was a good idea, but decided to go to her little personal nest. She didn't want to fall asleep, only to grow too big to move once it came time for her to give birth. Feeling a strong movement from one of her young, Haku paused for a moment, rubbing her belly soothingly. Ooh, you really need to get that recipe figured out. I told you already. The recipe is fine. I just mixed up one of the ingredients by accident, Naruto mumbled quietly in his defense as he walked over to her, giving her a hand over to her smaller nest. Easing her down on the well-padded pallet of furs, Naruto leaned down before lovingly kissing her, slipping his tongue into her mouth for a few seconds. Breaking apart and smiling up at him, Haku leaned back and relaxed while Naruto went over to the main bed. After making sure Shinobu was covered properly and tucked in, he laid down behind her and wrapped an arm around her waist, holding her close as he curled around her slightly. He had actually wanted to spend some actual, meaningful time with her when he got back from his hunt, having been expecting her to come by at some point. Now he'd have to wait until after their nap. Dushitan. Totsuka Budo. Naruto calmly stated as he formed a single hand seal, only to suddenly puke up a large amount of resin that collected on his right arm, forming a carapace-like gauntlet. Hardening instantly, Naruto beat his right fist back at shoulder height before driving his fist into the wooden training log he'd just put in the ground just a few minutes ago. Shinobu's eyes widened in surprise as the 3-foot diameter log exploded at the point of contact, Naruto's fist utterly destroying the top half of the log. Woe was all Shinobu could manage at the moment, having not expected such a massive power boost to Naruto's punch. And you said this thing can take a good deal of punishment. Yeah. Naruto responded before his previously made Kage Bunshin formed its own Totsuka Budo. Raising his forearm horizontally at shoulder height, Naruto spread his footing apart and bent his knees, hunkering down, with the widest portion of the carapace held out towards his right. A moment later, the Kage Bunshin punched Naruto's shield at full power, doing nothing more than putting a superficial fist-sized crater of spiderweb cracks in the shield's thickest section, set just before Naruto's elbow. If Shinobu was impressed by its durability, she was shocked as Naruto's clone continued hammering into his shield several more times, doing no more damage than he had before, while some of the pre-existing cracks started growing a little bigger with each hit. It wasn't until the clone's 15th blow before Naruto's shield shattered, his now bare arm still unscathed. Oh, geez, Shinobu mumbled quietly, grimacing slightly. She would hate to be anyone that had to face that kind of direct power and even stronger defensive capabilities. As his clone dispelled itself, Naruto flexed his hand a little bit while massaging his forearm a little bit. It protects me from damage, but I still feel the recoil of the blows. Naruto remarked as he faced Shinobu, grimacing slightly as he tried working out the numbness in his forearm and stiffness in his wrist. Thankfully, not many people are as physically strong as I am when it comes to my punches while using it. That's actually really good, Naruto. Especially for the first ever ninjutsu technique you've ever made. Shinobu praised wholeheartedly. Naruto's grimace became one of slight embarrassment, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. He wasn't used to such high praise. Now that you've finished it, have you thought of anything for another? I've got an idea for a range technique that can be used with 2 different elemental types to it. Naruto admitted a little shyly, turning his focus down to the ground in front of him. Shinobu could only think that if he'd been capable, he'd be blushing up a storm at the moment. With Jushitin, it's a hard-hitting non-lethal projectile that can immobilize a target or their limbs for capture. But Santon, however, it'd be purely offensive and strictly lethal, since it'd be made of acid of the same strength as my blood, maybe a fraction lesser. Santon? You mean you made 2, technically 3 techniques over the past 2 months? Shinobu inquired, stunned by Naruto's response to her previous question. Are they at least usable right now? Well, the Santon one is. It's honestly the easier of the two to do. Naruto remarked before forming a single hand seal. Santon. Santon. His cheeks puffed out before he spit out a rapidly moving projectile of bright neon green fluid that was just a little bigger than his head. Clearing the 50-foot gap between him and another training log in only a couple seconds, the acid projectile splashed against the log and immediately dissolved the log into slag in seconds. And now for the other one. Jushitin. Jushitin. Still forming the same hand seal, Naruto's cheeks puffed up once more before spitting out a similarly sized projectile of semi-translucent gray slime that flew just as fast as the Santon, but as it hit the training log, the impact was enough to tilt the post back a little bit. Unfortunately, the slime remained fluid-like and merely splattered against the log, finally starting to harden after almost 7 seconds. And that's why the Jushitin is still in its developmental stage. I can't get it to harden fast enough to be of any real use. You've got this, Naruto. Shinobu continued encouraging, absolutely amazed with Naruto's natural talent with ninjutsu. If in only 2 months, you can create 3 totally unique ninjutsu techniques, I have no doubt in my mind that you can finish it in no time. HSS Naruto hissed quietly as he shyly coiled his tail around his waist, still looking away from her. Wanting to derail the current topic, Naruto decided to bring up a totally different idea he'd been contemplating. Hey Shinobu, those Kakeichu you house in your body. Is it possible for you to potentially replace entire hives or possibly remove or replace the queens? It's extremely rare for anyone to do so, but yes, a hive transplant can be done. Shinobu hesitantly answered, suspicious of what Naruto's train of thought was leading up to. The hive could be unresponsive to commands in the beginning, however, so we'd have to essentially relearn all of our techniques and re-establish control over the new hive. The queen transplant, however, almost always ends in failure if a different queen is transplanted. Only the original queen can command the hive. Why? I was looking into alternative options, Naruto mumbled quietly, but refused to specify what it was he was considering. He didn't want to hybridize her like he had with Haku, but he still wanted to somehow connect her to the hive, to his family. If he could figure out some way to do that without directly affecting Shinobu, it would make him feel better about bringing her into the family, as it were. Plus, it would give her even more potential in terms of her clan's techniques and what she could do with them. He knew he was just rationalizing what he was thinking about, but he wasn't lying to himself about it. Besides, he was mostly contemplating it because of how persistent Haku was about bringing Shinobu into their relationship. Granted, he had feelings for her in return, but his loyalty to his queen mother was strong. Despite his feelings for Shinobu, Naruto struggled to comprehend the concept of them all entering a three-way relationship like that. For his queen mother's sake, he would still try, and maybe one day, it could happen like the two females wanted, but until then. Hey. No spacing out on me now. Shinobu remarked as she walked over to him, nudging him slightly. Shaking his head a little bit, Naruto sighed quietly. I'm not spacing out. I haven't fainted since the day before we left for Wave Country. He countered with a grimace, getting a hesitant look from Shinobu. I'm fine, Shinobu. Stop worrying so much. You know I can't exactly do that, she mumbled quietly, crossing her arms under her chest as she glanced off to the side. Hissing quietly in frustration, Naruto ran a hand over his head and carapace, knowing he was starting to upset her a little bit with his cryptic responses and semi-thoughtless remarks. Look, I'm trying to think of a way to actually connect you to the hive without, Naruto explained, only to stop himself short. Sighing once more, he looked at her with a slight frown. I don't want you to change, Shinobu. If you decide that you want to become something like us, I don't want your only option to be becoming like Haku and risk you losing who you are or your memories or anything of the sort. You're serious about that, aren't you? Shinobu questioned rhetorically, her voice soft and quiet as she stepped a little closer to him, a subtle look of apologetic affection on her face as she gently caressed his cheek. Smiling a little bit as he leaned into her hand, Shinobu gently hugged him. As of right now, I don't want to go that far, so don't worry about it too much. Let's just take our time with this, okay? Yeah, he sighed softly as he wrapped his arms around, leaning his cheek against the top of her head. Smiling more as Naruto's tail started snaking its way around her waist, Shinobu giggled quietly while pulling away from him by only a half step so that there was a thin sliver of space between them, but not enough to force his tail into letting go of her. We'll think of something eventually, but I'll still look into it for you, okay? Shinobu reassured before leaning up slightly and kissing him on the cheek affectionately. Now, how about we stop being so serious for today and go get something to eat, I know a place we can go that serves some pretty good nikumen. Me and Hayatari go there all the time. HSS if anyone tries causing a scene because of me, I'm coming back here, just so you know. Naruto forewarned as he started walking in the direction of the village, pulling Shinobu along with his tail so that she stayed beside him. At least until they left the forest of death, both having agreed to keep their slowly budding relationship a secret to the public for the time being. Smiling warmly, Shinobu gently held his arm against her as she leaned her head against his shoulder, simply enjoying the walk. So, what exactly were you thinking about when you asked about my Kakeichu earlier? Shinobu inquired after a while, the two sitting at a table out in front of the dango shop she'd brought Naruto to, the same one she and Hayatari always went to. So far, there hadn't been any issues with him being there, some of the other customers not even caring about his appearance, other than the initial shock value of it. He had to admit, he kind of liked it. It wasn't that bad. Well, I want to avoid having to fully change you as best as I can, but I still want something to truly connect you to the hive. Naruto started quietly, rubbing the back of his neck slightly. I was hoping to look into how your clan's Kakeichu colonies work and see if I could possibly hybridize your Kakeichu and give you an indirect link to the hive. Before I can even attempt to do something like that, though, I want to know as much as I can about them before doing anything to them. The last thing I'd ever want to happen is for your Kakeichu colony to turn on you or cause you any kind of problems because of the transformation. How exactly do you hybridize someone, if you don't mind me asking? She inquired curiously and a little cautiously, having been left in the dark about some of the details since the beginning. Naruto hesitated for a moment, recalling how it had been him that wanted her to stop asking questions about the hive. However, if she was going to truly join the hive, she would have to learn about some things first anyways, so that there weren't any surprises. Letting out a quiet hissing sigh, Naruto reached into one of his satchel pouches, withdrawing a tiny vial of pitch black liquid. It's technically something you could call venom that I naturally produce from a gland in my mouth and through my secondary fangs, but I only produce so much of it. Naruto answered as he showed Shinobu the vial for a moment. This is all I produced when I extracted some for a sample. It replenishes very slowly, so slowly that it'll be almost a month before I can extract the same amount a second time. This tiny little vial is one full dose. If just this got into your bloodstream or you ingested this, the transformation would take only 10 to 15 minutes to complete and you'd look like me and Haku. So, you're saying that just drinking this could cause that kind of reaction? Shinobu mused curiously, leaning down a little bit to get a better look at the liquid in the vial, which was only as big as her thumb, if not a tad smaller. And this could affect virtually any kind of organism like people, animals, insects, fish, and the like. As far as I believe, yes. If it can affect a human so drastically, why wouldn't it have similar effects on anything else? Naruto reasoned before taking a sip of his tea. He wasn't much for tea, but it was something with flavor to it. Granted, the overall outcome of the transformation would vary between species, but it would still technically be a Xenomorph. Would you be able to perform a sample test right now? Shinobu inquired cautiously, not wanting to pressure him into it if he didn't want to. He grimaced slightly for a moment as he thought it over. I can supply you with one of my Kakeichu, if you want. It might give you an idea of what to expect if you did hybridize my colony. That is a fair point, but not here, though. Naruto mumbled softly as he lightly scratched his neck under his chin, pocketing the vial once more. I don't want to risk that kind of information being discovered by anyone. My father already knows that I'm going to be spending the night with you and Haku, so I don't have a curfew tonight. Shinobu commented after checking her watch, the sun hanging low in sky. We could do it back at the hive after we leave here. That is true, he mumbled quietly, still weighing his options with it. After a few moments, though, he knew he would never find out until he did it. Alright. However, I'd appreciate it if you could look into getting me any scrolls or books on your clan's Kakeichu and any other insects, honestly. Like entomological information, not anything related to your clan's ninjutsu techniques. Entomological? You want to study our insects? Shinobu asked in mild surprise, getting a nod from Naruto. As strange as Xenomorphs are, they share a lot of traits and characteristics with insects, so it's only natural that I study them. Naruto explained before finishing off his tea. I'm hoping that studying entomology will help me in my research with hybridizing your Kakeichu and, by proxy, you if you decide to become a part of the hive. Not only that, by studying entomology, I might be able to find a more compatible species of insect that could benefit the most from being hybridized and still remain controllable. Why other insects, though? The Aburami heiress asked quietly and a little suspiciously, only getting a faint smile from Naruto as he bowed his head a little. I plan on establishing ourselves as a minor clan one day. Naruto admitted quietly, rubbing the back and side of his neck awkwardly. He decided to omit the fact that he also hoped to one day build strong ties with the Aburami clan if Shinobu was serious about joining the hive. By doing that, it guaranteed that they'd have some allies, both in a fight and in politics, with both sides benefiting from a symbiotic relationship. But in order for me to do that, it's required that any form of bloodline, which hybridization could be classified as one, must be able to be passed on to any offspring. Even if it's only a single child out of many, it has to be inheritable to be classified as such. The only downside right now is that me and Haku haven't produced any hybridized human offspring. Only full-blooded xenomorphs. However, that's between two fully hybridized people. If only your Kakachu hive is hybridized, there's a chance of any offspring you have being xenomorphs like mine and Haku's, a hybridized human, or even a half-blooded hybridized human like yourself at that point. You've really been thinking about this, haven't you? Shinobu whispered softly as she gently and discreetly placed her hand on his, looking at him with sincere emotion and mild surprise. Feeling him gently squeeze her fingers in response, Shinobu couldn't help smiling faintly, having never expected Naruto to think about so many things that could be if things between them became truly serious. Seeing him smile slightly in return warmed her heart. Maybe one day, Naruto. There's no telling what the future may hold for us. He grunted out quietly before deciding they'd been there long enough. He wanted to get back to the hive to check on Haku, anyways. She hadn't given birth yet when they'd left for the training field earlier in the day, and he wanted to make sure there hadn't been any complications. The voice hadn't acted up yet, so he wasn't too concerned at the moment. Finding himself a little reluctant to let go of Shinobu's hand, he stood up to leave. Come on. Let's get back to the hive so I can check on Haku before we run any tests. Wordlessly standing up and falling in step beside him, Shinobu had to stuff her hands in her coat pockets to keep from grabbing his hand again. When she first did it, she had almost forgotten that they were still out in public for a minute. For now, though, she was content with just being near him, smiling faintly behind the high collar of her coat, her Kakachu buzzing quietly in reaction to her happy state of contentment. HSS, I'm going to have to think of something soon. Our hive has grown much larger than I had expected it to in such a short time frame. Naruto mumbled with a sigh, mostly talking to himself as he and Shinobu went back to the clearing they'd been at earlier in the day. Sensing Shinobu's curiosity and confusion, he continued while rubbing the back of his neck tiredly. She gave birth to 53 this time. Food isn't the problem, though. Even the full-grown warriors only eat once every few days, and they can go longer without food if they have to, but the problem right now is space. I'm going to have to either find another location near the village or expand the hive more. Has it really been growing that big? Shinobu asked, mildly stunned by the news, while Naruto nodded. Thinking about something, though, she grimaced slightly. If you want to stall out the hive's population, you need to get that contraceptive perfected. Hayatari knows a lot about medicinal herbs and could be a huge help to you with it, but I know you don't want to let a lot of people know about this. I've actually been thinking about that myself. He's trustworthy, but if Kurenai starts getting suspicious, I have no doubt she'll easily track us back here and potentially discover the hive. Naruto mumbled quietly while taking a seat on a nearby log, still staring at the ground blankly as he contemplated his slowly dwindling options. If things keep going at this rate, it won't be long before we're discovered, and when that happens, there's no telling what might happen to the hive. When you see him next, would you mind discreetly asking for his help on the matter? Even just a good, reliable recipe would be a lot of help. Of course. He'll probably tease me about it, but I'll ask. Shinobu assured as she held her hand out towards her teammate and love interest, a couple Kakachu crawling out from her sleeve and onto her hand. Now, how about we get this test taken care of? Yeah. Naruto mumbled before pulling out the vial of his venom and a small glass jar. While Shinobu had one of the small beetles stay on the now open jar's lid, Naruto used the dripper in the vial to administer only a single droplet of his venom, simply covering the beetle, a male, with it. After pocketing his vial of venom once more, he dumped the doused beetle into the jar and closed the lid, setting it on the log so they could both easily watch. It had been a simple precaution, not wanting his venom to unknowingly infect anything else by accident. Within seconds, they watched as the Kakachu beetle started squirming around before going still, his venom easily soaking into its tiny body. When it didn't move for a few more seconds, Naruto sighed, bowing his head as he thought it failed and killed the insect. Damn it. Hold on. Keep watching, Shinobu mumbled without taking her eyes off the beetle. After a moment, the beetle moved. Or rather, something inside of it moved. After only a moment of struggle, the hybridized Kakachu beetle broke free of its old exoskeleton, quickly growing a fraction bigger than its old size as its exoskeleton hardened once more. Instead of the beetle-like appearance of a normal Kakachu, it now had 4 legs that seemed almost like spider legs mixed with claws, with a smaller thorax and abdomen that extended into a semi-flexible tie-like growth, not too dissimilar to the same kind of tail Naruto had. Its head had taken on an elongated shape similar to that of the warriors in the hive, only its mouth had formed into a vertically oriented pincer, with a tinier collection of mandibles for a mouth where the 2 pincers met, the back half of its head having become a semi-transparent yellow-orange color. It also possessed 2 tiny claw-like arms just under its head, while 2 dorsal tube-like growths extended from its back just behind its head, both twitching slightly, as if they were wings before folding down against its back. Fascinating, Naruto whispered quietly in shock as he stood up with the jar in his hands, looking more closely at the tiny hybridized insect. Haku had simply started changing, but the Kakachu seemed to transform internally before breaking out of its old shell. Then again, being an insect, that's how a lot of them tend to grow or adapt. Shinobu hummed out quietly in agreement as Naruto passed her the jar. Almost immediately, the hybridized insect started crawling around a little more actively, as if trying to get closer to her. As curious and excited as she was by the seemingly successful first test, Shinobu had to admit that she was still nervous. Unlike her Kakachu, the hybrid was definitely adapted for more vicious behavior. Not only that, but lacking any kind of wings from what she could see, it would be completely limited to the ground. That was when she was forced to correct herself, watching as its dorsal tubes rose up on its back before 4 slender insectoid wings pulled away from the bottom of them, each one connected to its body at the base of its dorsal tubes. Darting towards the jar's lid with surprising swiftness, the hybrid beetle flipped over and touched down on the lid, crawling around a little more. This is so strange, exciting, but strange. You're not the only one that's amazed right now, Shinobu. Hearing him say that, Shinobu passed the jar back to Naruto. Slowly opening the jar, Naruto let the small insect crawl onto his hand, wanting to know what its temperament was like. If it proved too hostile, he'd have no choice other than to kill it then and there, just to keep from risking it hurting Shinobu. As it crawled around on his hand and arm, Naruto couldn't help smiling slightly, getting a weird look from Shinobu. Noticing it, he grimaced slightly with embarrassment. It tickles a little bit. Shinobu could only laugh quietly at him, her Kakachu buzzing softly within the confines of her coat again. That's when she watched Naruto pick up a small stick while the hybrid insect crawled back to his hand. Slowly bringing the stick close to it, Naruto gently tapped its pincers, only for it to suddenly bite down on the twig, easily snapping the tiny piece of wood in an instant. Somehow, I don't think that will feed on chakra like it used to. Shinobu remarked with a hint of sarcasm as she watched the strange-looking bug grab onto the stick with its pincer-like jaws. Despite its eyes, Naruto was surprised by how strong it was, able to feel it pulling on the stick quite noticeably. Letting it have the twig, Naruto watched as the hybridized bug started breaking the stick apart, moving it quite easily despite the twig weighing close to 20 times its own weight. Apart from having an obviously painful bite and surprising strength for its eyes, it seems pretty docile right now. How it would react in a threatened scenario, though, I don't quite know. Naruto commented idly as he continued watching the insect as it started picking at one of the stick pieces with its arm-like appendages. As its wings withdrew back into the undersides of its dorsal tubes before they folded back down, Naruto found himself rather intrigued, having never thought that they'd be used like that. Putting the insect back in the jar, Naruto put the lid back on to keep it from flying back out. Do you want to see how it interacts with your other Kakachu? Nodding, Shinobu waited until Naruto opened the jar again before depositing another of her insects into the jar, the two watching silently. As the normal Kakachu drew near the hybridized one, Naruto half expected the hybrid to attack, but it didn't. Instead, they seemingly stared at one another, but Naruto knew they were communicating through their own pheromones. After a moment, they simply scuttled away from each other, aimlessly crawling around inside the jar. Thank goodness. I was afraid they'd try to fight. Shinobu sighed out with relief before gently taking the jar from Naruto and opening it back up. Letting the two insects crawl out onto her palm, Shinobu waited patiently, though a little nervously as the hybrid joined her Kakachu beetle on her hand. Her nervousness went unwarranted as it acted no differently than it had while on Naruto's hand. Looking up at Naruto, she smiled warmly. Looks like it was a success. Yeah. It does. Naruto mumbled quietly, his head angled towards the hybrid, but he was actually paying attention to Shinobu's pheromones for a moment. She was really happy. Not just about their little experiment, but about doing it with him. Smiling softly himself, Naruto awkwardly rubbed the back of his neck for a moment before thinking about something related to the new hybrid. Go ahead and keep it with you. Since neither of them are hostile towards one another, you shouldn't have any problems. Plus, it'll give your Kakachu time to get used to it more. At a later date, if you want, I can hybridize a small number of your Kakachu to supplement your colony. It'll give you something to practice with, like a Preview of what you could do with your insects if you decide to fully hybridize them. And that sounds like a good idea. Shinobu agreed before focusing on the hybrid insect as it curiously crawled along her hand and between her fingers. Staring at it, she started moving it from one hand to the other, idly deciding to name it Kayageki, seeing as it was the only one to exist so far. With their experiment done, Shinobu started unbuttoning her trench coat as she started heading back towards the hive, Kayageki scurrying into one of her sleeves to continue exploring. Come on. Let's go tell Haku about this. Naruto couldn't help smiling slightly as he watched her walk back to the cave entrance. If she'd been happy earlier, she was absolutely overflowing with joy this time, his omniscient senses idly detecting the small number of her tiny flying beetles as they flew through the air around her. He was glad she was enjoying herself. She'd always seemed so gloomy, and while not depressed, she had never exhibited any real joy back in the academy. Smiling a little bit more, Naruto collected the jar they'd used and stashed it in the satchel pouch on his leg before following after his teammate. The contraceptive? You mean, like birth control? Hayatari asked curiously, yet suspiciously before narrowing his eyes slightly. You and Naruto haven't been, have you? No, and you'll do well not to insinuate such things. Shinobu countered sharply, though stoically, as her Kakachu started buzzing angrily within her trench coat, her hand closing around Kayageki to keep it from being seen as it tried coming out of her sleeve. Even still, her cheeks flushed behind her collar with the assumption. It's for a friend of mine. Not me. Alright. Just calm down. Hayatari mumbled a little nervously, eyeing the numerous beetles scurrying across her trench coat with a bit of caution. Rubbing his masked chin, he started thinking about Shinobu's request. I don't have anything like that on hand, but I know a couple different recipes. For one as strong as you're looking for, though. I'll have to look through my mom's old herbal remedies, but I think I might have something that could help your friend. I still don't understand why they couldn't just go visit a doctor for something, though. They don't like regular medications, and hospitals scare them a little bit. Shinobu answered semi-truthfully, helping keep her usual telltale from popping up. They prefer all natural medicines, which is why I came to you about this. You know a decent bit about medicinal herbs. Thank you for the compliment, but I don't know everything, you know, Hayatari mumbled shyly, blushing a little bit beneath his mask as he turned his gaze down towards the ground, twiddling his fingers a little nervously. Taking a deep breath as he calmed himself back down, Hayatari stuffed his hands into his jacket pockets. I'll bring you what I can find when we meet up with Kurenai-sensei tomorrow morning for team training, okay? Thank you, Hayatari. Anything would be a big help. Shinobu returned gratefully with a slight bow, only making Hayatari feel embarrassed again. Straightening back up, Shinobu turned to leave. I have a couple more errands to run, so I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good day. You, too. The Hokage responded with a wave, watching as Shinobu left before mumbling to himself under his breath with a sigh. Those two better not be fooling around, Kurenai-sensei would kick their butts for it. Hiruzen hummed quietly to himself as he stood in the forest of death, dressed in the red and white Hokage robes, with his hands clasped behind his back. Waving a hand slightly to have his Anbu guard stay where they were, he started walking deeper into the forest. He could just barely sense the shadowy creatures, but he knew they were there. The only thing he could sense from them, however, was a hint of killing intent. As he started getting closer to a lone cave, however, the killing intent suddenly spiked. Interesting. HSS. Naruto suddenly hissed loudly and sharply from off to the side, causing a Xenomorph warrior perched on a branch above the Sandayami to freeze, its tail blade having been drawn back for a spearing thrust. Slowly looking up as he grasped the edge of his hat to keep it from falling, Hiruzen could only stare at the creature's snarling visage with wide eyes. He hadn't noticed that one. Hissing quietly, the warrior slowly crawled over to where Naruto was, only to be hissed at sharply, though quietly, by its king father. Cowering slightly, it slowly moved around behind Naruto before taking up its spot beside him. Looking at Hiruzen, Naruto grimaced with a faint snarl, detecting no pheromones tied to fear or shock. You've known, haven't you? Yes, I have. Since the beginning, actually. Hiruzen remarked as he turned to face the boy fully, clasping his hands behind his back again. How's the girl, by the way? She's fine. Naruto mumbled quietly, suspicious of how he knew of Haku's existence, but if he had known of the hive, he knew of her. What do you want? I can't check on you, someone I think of as a grandson. Hiruzen questioned, only for Naruto to hiss quietly with irritation. Sighing heavily, Hiruzen decided to be blunt about it. I came to properly assess the situation. I needed to make sure they won't pose a threat to the village. You know it's my duty to protect the village, Naruto. It might be your duty to protect the village, but it is my duty to protect my hive, Naruto responded quietly as he put a hand on the warrior's head, prompting the Xenomorph to hiss quietly as it crouched down a little bit more. Hiruzen found himself unable to deny Naruto's logic, seeing how obedient the creature was to him. To me, they are no different than the people of the village are to you, they are my family. I would never allow them to harm anyone of Konoha, that is why I brought them here, to the Forest of Death, where no one would encounter them. They would never defy me. I have no doubt of that now, Naruto. Rest assured, I do not plan on taking action against you or your hive. Hiruzen responded calmly, trying to soothe Naruto's concerns. It did little to calm the obsidian-skinned teen. I understand how you feel, Naruto. If the council catches wind of this, however, I cannot guarantee the safety of your hive. But there is something you can do to help prevent that. That is to make my own clan. I know the laws and their loopholes. Naruto remarked, finishing off the Sandaimi's thoughts and mildly surprising the old man. I was already intending to do just that once I found the time and resources to do so. I know that we cannot stay here in the forest forever, but where will we go? We cannot go to the village, the people will not accept that, and there is no room for us. That is where you are mistaken, Naruto. Well, you are correct about there not being enough room for you and your hive in Konoha, but beneath it, Hiruzen remarked before trailing off for a moment, this time surprising Naruto in return. Back during the First and Second Great Wars, a network of underground tunnels had been made to hide certain things, or to discreetly transport things around the village where spies couldn't see. They haven't been used since the Third Great War, left abandoned and forgotten by all, but a small few. You and your hive can live there in peace. If you can ensure that no harm will ever come to Konoha's people, they can act as a secret weapon, in a way. Not one that I nor anyone else can control, though. One that only you can control. They can act as the village's last line of defense if we were to ever be attacked. What's the catch? Naruto asked quietly and cautiously, suspicious of ill intent and ulterior motives, even though he could detect no deception from the Hokage. I must say, you've grown to be quite shrewd, Naruto. Hiruzen returned idly with a slight nod of respect. However, your suspicion is unwarranted. The only catch was for your hive to act in Konoha's defense if we were to ever be attacked. That's all. You may have your hive, Naruto, but you are still family to me. You are still a child of Konoha. I merely ask that you protect her. Give me time to think about it. Naruto answered quietly after a few seconds of silence, only to turn around and start heading towards the nearby cave. Hiruzen's eyes jumped up towards the trees around them as nearly 3 dozen other Xenomorph warriors revealed themselves, each of them heading towards the cave. He had sensed only a fraction of them, having noticed only a half dozen or so. They were frighteningly stealthy creatures. Now, leave us in peace. I have to talk with Haku about this. Remember, Naruto, I had your best intentions in mind when you were younger and I still do. That will never change. The Sandaime called out to the boy as he left, leaving Hiruzen to stand in the clearing by himself. Sighing quietly, he turned around and started heading back to where he'd left his guards, hoping Naruto accepted his offer. Meeting back up with his guards, Hiruzen silently gestured for them to follow before heading back to Konoha. Having a gut feeling that Naruto would eventually accept his offer, Hiruzen decided to get some very specific forms prepared along with arranging a few things ahead of time. He wanted the transition to be as smooth as possible for Naruto. The tense silence fell over the chamber's occupants after Naruto finished telling them about what he'd spoken to the Hokage about just outside of the hive. Shinobu was sitting on the nest, leaning back against the wall while Haku laid beside her, her head laying in the Aburami girl's lap. Naruto, on the other hand, was leaning back against a far wall, his arms crossed over his chest with his head bowed and tail loosely coiled around his waist. It was silent for several minutes as everyone thought about their options. I think we should take him up on his offer. Haku was the first to break the silence, her decision making Naruto's tail slowly tighten around him as he grimaced. Looking towards him, she frowned slightly. I know you are scared. I am, too, but we don't have any other options. If we can't get a strong enough contraceptive, our hive is going to outgrow the Forest of Death and soon. At least in the tunnels, we'll have more room. From what you said, the Hokage sounded as if he was already planning on making us our own clan, giving us a slight immunity to anything the council might attempt against us. Haku's right, Naruto. If we don't accept, there's no telling what the council could do to us. Shinobu spoke up after the couple moments of silence that followed after Haku voiced her thoughts on the matter. Tightening his grip on his arms, Naruto tensed his jaw slightly. Unnoticed by the Aburami, Haku glanced up at Shinobu, smiling faintly. The girl was already considering herself a part of the hive. At least if we take the deal, we can buy ourselves some more time to figure everything out. Naruto stayed silent as he stood there, thinking it all over. Well, they weren't wrong, he still couldn't help feeling suspicious of it all. As careful and cautious as he'd been, the Sandaime had still known of what he'd been doing since the beginning. He knew of Haku, the hive, everything. He'd gone to such great lengths to keep it all hidden, so how did he know? Even if the Sandaime had been telling the truth earlier, that didn't mean he told him everything. The Hokage had been right about one thing, though he had become shrewd as of late. Feeling something crawling up his leg, Naruto was broken from his thoughts before seeing the small hybridized insect he and Shinobu had made yesterday, Kaijeki, as Shinobu had called it. As it crawled up to where his arms were, it seemed to look up at him before snapping its pincer jaws once and scuttling around some more. You two might be more willing to accept it, but I'm not going to take any risks. Naruto mumbled quietly with a soft sigh while Haku stood up from her spot. Neither of you have lost anything like I have. You don't know what it's like to be in that void. If anything happened to you or the hive, it would kill me. Maybe not literally, but I know I wouldn't be able to handle it. I can't lose any of you. And you won't, dear, Haku whispered softly as she stepped up to him, gently cupping his cheek before leaning forward slightly to rest her forehead against his. Having been releasing calming pheromones, Naruto slowly started losing the tension in his body, relaxing slightly as Haku tried to calm him down. We are stronger than you give us credit for. We can take care of ourselves just fine. I know, he whispered quietly, ignoring Kaijeki as it scurried across his featureless face before crawling down Haku's arm. It was such a curious little thing, always exploring and wandering. But so was Tensei. She'd been an Anbu, and yet she still. Haku hushed quietly before looping her tail around him, pulling him along in the direction of the bed. After getting him to lay down, Haku and Shinobu took up their usual positions around him with Shinobu in front of him and Haku behind him, just like it had been since Shinobu's first visit to the hive. As they both held him, Naruto's shivering slowly started to lessen, but it didn't go away fully. Gently kissing the back of his neck, Haku held him close while Shinobu cradled his head against her chest, the two females mildly worried for him. Even after so long, he still got worked up whenever he thought of his late queen mother. Hissing quietly as he stalked the lightless corridors of earth and stone, Naruto couldn't hold back the snarl from forming on his face, his dorsal tubes fully extended. It had been a little over a decade, but he still recalled these passages. While his clones scouted out other parts of the tunnel system, Naruto had been drawn towards the back portion that sat below the Hokage monument, brief glimpses of old memories flashing through his mind. The stone-walled paths were large, measuring almost 20 feet wide and just as tall. Where he was, though, the hall came to an abrupt end, a pair of thick wooden doors set into the far wall just ahead that were almost as wide as the hallway itself. Walking up to them, he lightly brushed a hand across their surface, only for the phantom pain of his memories to spike again. Retracting his hand as if he'd been burned, Naruto's snarl grew vicious as he hissed angrily, taking a step back as he formed a hand seal. Dushitin. Totsuka Budo. He snarled before vomiting resin onto his right arm, forming the carapace-like gauntlet on his arm. Beeping his right hand back, he punched the doors with his full strength. Skree. Instantly, the pair of 2-foot-thick 10-foot-wide wooden slabs were blown open by the impact, each bearing a half of a 10-foot diameter hole, where they normally met when closed. Chunks and splinters of wood scattered all around from the explosive force of his punch. Hissing loudly, Naruto slowly stepped into the empty halls of what had once been the laboratory his captors had resided in, where he had been housed as they experimented on him. From what the Sandaime had told him a long time ago, most of the critical things had been destroyed in various ways during the raid. Piles of data sheets and research information had been burned to ash, test samples smashed and burned, equipment fried and broken beyond repair. Now, none of it remained apart from a scarce few menial things. It had all been catalogued as evidence and cleared out during the investigation that followed the raid's aftermath. It had once belonged to his most hated enemy. Now it was all his. A part of him wanted nothing more than to destroy the lab, to cave it in and fill it with rubble. However, his more rational and calmer side knew it could be extremely useful to him with his own studies and research. Deciding to keep it in the end, Naruto wandered the halls aimlessly, his body moving on autopilot. The laboratory wasn't very big, but it was dense with different rooms. There was plenty of space for him to scatter the different fields he was researching, so that none of them mixed with another or hindered one field of research or another. Hissing quietly with fury as he came across a very familiar room, Naruto slowly crouched down before lightly touching his hand to a spot on the floor. There was a small puncture hole in the metal flooring, an empty glass obelisk standing in front of him. It was the room he had once occupied so many years ago. The room where he'd been found. The room where Tensei had taken him in without hesitation. Standing up, Naruto stared down at the small hole where his tail had stabbed into the floor to hold him up back then, his hands curling into fists as he faced his past. With a seemingly effortless backhand, the obelisk of glass was shattered into oblivion by his resin-armored hand. Turning around, Naruto started walking back out of the lab, still snarling as he went deeper into the tunnel system. Alright. All that's left now is to give your clan a name, Naruto. Hiruzen commented as he finished signing off on the paperwork he'd been doing with Naruto, helping guide the team through the process. Have you given any thought to it? Some. He mumbled quietly, having scouted out the entirety of the tunnel system before coming to see the Hokage about the final part of their deal, the creation of his clan. After a moment, he wrote down the name for his clan on the form before sliding it across the desk to the Sandaime. Picking it up and looking at it, Hiruzen couldn't help quirking an eyebrow slightly as he read the name before glancing up at Naruto. Nodding slightly to himself, Hiruzen signed off on the form before setting it with the rest of the applications. "Are we done?" "Yes, we are," Hiruzen responded. "I'll be honest, though. I had actually expected you to keep Tensei's name. No, as grateful as I am for everything she did for me back then, I cannot continue living in her shadow," Naruto answered quietly. "Now, the Subako clan exists and as clan head, I want everything that was in that lab. The data that had been recovered back then is now, technically, Subako clan secrets." "I thought you would." Hiruzen sighed out quietly, knowing it was pointless to argue the matter. Naruto was not wrong. Anything in that lab relating to his creation was now, by law, property of the newly formed Subako clan. Reaching down behind his desk, Hiruzen picked up the large sealing scroll he had placed beside him before setting it on his desk. Standing up, Naruto grabbed the leather carrying strap attached to it before hanging it off his shoulder, turning to leave. "Before you go, Naruto, I wanted to apologize to you for the other day, back in the Forest of Death. I didn't mean to trespass or offend you. I admit that I could have approached you a little more tactfully about everything, but I didn't. For that, I am sorry." "How did you know?" Naruto asked after a moment without turning back around. "I took every precaution to keep it all hidden." "So, how did you know?" "Just an old relic of the past." Hiruzen answered cryptically, but still pulled out the crystal ball he kept stashed in one of his desk drawers, a look of nostalgia crossing his face as he stared at the transparent orb in his hand. Able to see it without turning around thanks to his omniscient senses, Naruto grimaced slightly, so the old man had an all-seeing eye, it seemed. One that he couldn't even detect at that. Heading towards the door, Naruto adjusted the strap to the storage scroll. "Stop spying on me," he mumbled before leaving the office. Sighing heavily, Hiruzen set the orb back down on the purple cushion in the drawer, sliding it shut a moment later. It seemed like he had some work to do if he was going to regain Naruto's trust. He should have just called the boy to his office like he first thought to do instead of taking the initiative like he had. Outside, Naruto ignored the people on the street as he walked towards the nearest entrance into the tunnel system, each one expertly hidden all throughout the village. Once night fell over the village, he intended to start moving his hive into their new home before getting to work on securing each and every one of the entrances. He was going to make sure that no one other than himself and his Xenomorph children could get in and out of the hive, with only a couple exceptions. Before any of that, however, he had a lab to set up for his work. "Someone's a fast worker," Shinobu mumbled to herself as she dropped down into the new hive from one of the entrances she'd been shown yesterday, which wasn't all that far from the hive's center. The corridors were already thickly encased in resin, the all too familiar humid air forcing her to take her coat off in minutes as she started walking down the passageway. But the size of the tunnel system, she wasn't surprised to see only a couple warriors making their way around, one of them drawing close enough for her to run her hand along its head, a common greeting ritual she shared with the Xenomorphs. All this in only 2 days. "I'm impressed." "I am as well," Haku remarked as she approached from an intersecting tunnel just as Shinobu walked into view. Walking up to the Aburami girl, Haku didn't hesitate to greet Shinobu in her usual way, an intimate kiss. Moaning ever so slightly, Shinobu returned it without thinking twice, something that pleased Haku quite a bit. Her efforts were finally showing results. Breaking apart after a few seconds, Haku smiled warmly at her while gently wiping away the hint of saliva that always ended up at the corner of Shinobu's mouth. "If you've come to see Naruto, he hasn't left his lab all morning." "His lab? Naruto has a lab?" Shinobu questioned as she and Haku started walking, the hybrid queen mother's tail loosely wrapping around her waist to keep her close. "What has he been doing in there?" "I honestly don't know," but Haku began before trailing off, her smiling shifting into a slight frown, but not out of sadness, mostly confusion and curiosity. Thankfully, the lab wasn't far from where they were. "I've been hearing more voices recently, new ones." "What do you mean?" Shinobu inquired, only to hear something further up. Detaching her tail from around her partner's waist, Haku and Shinobu both ran forward to the nearby intersection to find the doors to Naruto's lab open and a never-before-seen Xenomorph standing before them. While neither feared it, it was still an intimidating sight, having never seen one like it before. What is that?" Seemingly limited to walking on all fours, regardless of the tunnel, the new variant stood just a little taller than either of them at 6 feet in height at the shoulder. Its body was more heavily muscled than any of the warriors, while a wide, though somewhat short carapace of dense black bone fanned out from the back of its head. Reaching around either side of its eyeless visage, it bore two wide-set blade-like tusks of black bone that extended a good 2 feet in front of its mouth. It bore 4 back-swept dorsal tubes on its back, the larger pair growing out from behind its shoulders, while the smaller pair were situated near its lower back, its tail equipped with a large 3-foot-long tail blade. The claws on its 4 6-toed paw-like feet were hooked and seemed semi-retractable, from the look of them. HSS. The giant Xenomorph hissed loudly before another hiss was heard behind it, prompting it to sidestep a little and glance back partway as Naruto started walking out of the lab from behind it. Moving around in front of it, Naruto grabbed one of its tusks, but not aggressively. As he forced its head to tilt down slightly, Naruto couldn't resist the slight grin as it shoved him back, shaking its body and head for a moment. Patting the side of its thick neck, Naruto finally noticed the two new arrivals, glancing over towards Haku and Shinobu. "So, this is what you've been up to," Haku remarked as she walked over to Naruto and the hybridized beast, tenderly caressing the side of its face before rubbing under its chin. It hissed quietly in contentment, enjoying the attention its queen mother was giving it. "Yeah, I went out and captured a few panthers from the forest of death before sunrise," Naruto responded while running a hand along its tusk again, something he hadn't expected it to develop. The panthers he spoke of stood only about 5 feet tall, but they were strong. He'd watched 2 of them fight off one of the giant tigers back in the forest of death a week ago, and their tenacity impressed him quite a bit. The hybridization took a little longer than I had expected, but as you can see, it was a success. Like I had first theorized, the larger the creature, the longer it takes for the hybridization process to finish. "I can see that, but why?" Haku questioned, Shinobu hanging back as she eyed the hybridized beast cautiously. She might have befriended the warriors, but it was a new addition, and she wasn't too keen on testing her luck with it just yet. Naruto grimaced slightly as he glanced away from a moment. "With how much space we have, I wanted to add something a little beefier to the hive. Something not only a little bigger, but something that could take more hits and hit back harder. I decided to call them hunters." Naruto responded before he and Haku let the large Xenomorph hunter leave to wander the hive. "I've only made 4 of them so far, but they're strong, fast, and agile. They're also very smart and really good at tracking. I've got my eye on a few other animals that I plan on hybridizing as well, but I want to take care of a few other things first before I start adding any more new castes to the hive." "I'm glad you're adjusting well, Naruto." Shinobu spoke up as she walked over to him, putting a hand on his shoulder as she smiled softly. "I was a little worried. With how you had been against the Hokage's offer before, I thought you might not take the move all too well." "I almost didn't." Naruto mumbled quietly as he walked over to close the doors to his lab, the hole he'd put in them having been heavily patched with resin. Instead of elaborating on what he meant, Naruto pulled out a small storage scroll from one of his equipment pouches and handed it to Shinobu, grimacing slightly as he stared off to the side slightly, feeling mildly embarrassed and awkward. I made you a little something." "You made me something." Shinobu mumbled quietly before unraveling the scroll and unsealing the object stored within. In a cloud of smoke, what looked almost like a thin hard-shelled backpack appeared. It was only a couple inches thick, but it was big enough to cover most of her upper back. It was a beige-tan color, and after a moment of investigation, she saw how it was filled completely with hardened resin, a pair of thick brown leather straps attached to it to hold it in place. It wasn't even all that heavy, either, maybe only about 10 to 15 pounds at most. "What is this for?" "I noticed how Kayajeki was always out. I figured he was too big to fit inside you with the rest of your colony," Naruto remarked softly as he rubbed the back of his neck, ignoring the knowing smirk on Haku's face as she stared at him. "If I hybridize more of your Kakachu, they'll at least have somewhere to go now." Thank you." Shinobu stuttered slightly as she stood up with the pack in her hands, her cheeks burning hot as she smiled shyly. Slipping it on, she found it to be surprisingly comfortable, the underside of it feeling slightly cushioned for the wearer's comfort. Reaching into her equipment pouch, she pulled out Kayajeki before setting it on her shoulder. Snapping its pincers slightly, Kayajeki curled around on her shoulder for a second before noticing the new object on her back. Curious, it moved closer to it before suddenly starting to gnaw through the resin with surprising ease, carving out the first tunnel in it. Still blushing, she smiled at Naruto a little more happily. "He likes it." "That's good," Naruto mumbled quietly, feeling unusually awkward and shy. Smiling more warmly, Haku shook her head slightly at her king father's behavior. While Shinobu couldn't, Haku could quite easily detect the love-based pheromones he was releasing as he interacted with Shinobu. Wanting to change the subject, he looked back up at Shinobu finally, forcing himself to calm down. "So, what brings you here? I wasn't expecting to see you today." "Well, Kurenai-sensei kind of sent me to find you since you didn't show up for team training today," she answered, only to laugh quietly as Naruto sighed heavily and palmed his face. "They're waiting for me to come back with you so we can go get a simple D-rank mission to finish the day off with." Shit, I had forgotten about that. Naruto sighed out quietly. We better not keep her waiting. I don't need her getting any madder at me. Go have fun. Haku whispered teasingly as she gave her life-mate a tender kiss on the lips. Grimacing slightly, Naruto hissed a little bit, not finding the joke funny at all. As the two ran down the tunnel towards the nearest exit, Haku smirked slightly while folding her arms across her stomach. He was finally warming up to Shinobu more fully and accepting his feelings for the girl. Took him long enough. What are you reading this time? Kurenai inquired as she walked up beside the tree Naruto was in, the hybrid teen lounging on a low-hanging branch with a book in his hands, his tail loosely coiled around the tree limb. It had been a month since she found out about everything Naruto had been up to, his hive, his clan, Shinobu's new insects, the creatures. She warily eyed the hunter sleeping under the tree on the other side. Even after a month of it joining him for their team training exercises and even providing some assistance with the physical labor during a couple of their D-rank missions, Kurenai was still unnerved by its eyes and menacing appearance. Advanced to Injutsu theory. I want to create a summoning contract with my hive. Naruto answered calmly without turning his focus away from the book in his hands. Not having any eyes, he could have the book opened up behind him and still be able to read it, but his focus was always greater when it was in front of his face. Kurenai was surprised and a little shocked by his answer. He'd only been a genin for a handful of months, and he was already branching his skills out to more advanced things. It'll make it easier and faster to deploy them while out on missions or in an unexpected fight. It'll be a while before I'm skilled enough to create one, though. That's actually pretty impressive. The red-eyed jounin admitted sincerely, honestly proud of her student, even though she hadn't played much of a part in his development. It had been all him. In her opinion, he was kind of a prodigy, only without a focusing point like most others. Most of the prodigies in the village specialized in one aspect or another, be it ninjutsu, taijutsu, or genjutsu. With him, though, he was kind of scattered all over the place with his studies, but he somehow found the time for it all. She wasn't aware of the fact that he had figured out the trick to training with Kage Bunshin, usually keeping a dozen or so in his lab now to keep studying other subjects. Hey Naruto. You up for a spar? Hayatari called out, prompting a slight grimace from Naruto as he closed the book and put it away. He wanted to learn as much as he could about Fuinjutsu to make sure he didn't mess up anywhere whenever he got around to making the contract. Uncoiling his tail from around the branch, Naruto dropped down to the ground before walking out from under the tree. He wasn't going to enjoy the fight much. Hayatari had been getting better and better with his clan's taijutsu style over the past couple months. Whenever they sparred, Hayatari had a bad habit of hitting the chakra points in his tail, making it harder for him to use it right. This will be an interesting match. Shinobu mumbled from her spot beside Kurenai, giving the jounin a slight start. She hadn't been paying attention, giving the Aburami heiress the chance to unknowingly sneak up on her. Having just finished practicing a few techniques with her new Kamikeichu, Shinobu had arrived just in time for Naruto and Hayatari to enter their personal taijutsu stances. Already familiar with Hayatari's, she was more interested in Naruto's, which was constantly evolving. He kept his knees bent with his left leg leading, his upper torso hunched down and forward slightly, while his tail was curled around his right side, with a 2.5-foot-long blade of black bone resting almost limply on the ground beside him. His right six-clawed hand was balled up into a fist, beeped back near his shoulder, while his left was kept beeped back near his fist. She knew he used his fists, elbows, and knees more than he normally would when sparring with them, not wanting to seriously injure them, which made her curious as to how he truly fought. She hadn't yet seen it, and despite the knowledge that she might not enjoy such a sight, Shinobu couldn't get rid of her curiosity of it. Not quite as patient as his teammate, Hayatari was the first to move, rushing forward with a palm thrust. Twisting his body, Naruto knocked the Hokage's hand aside at the wrist with his left elbow, only to fully extend his arm out in front of the boy. Swinging his arm back in the same motion, Naruto used his tail to grab Hayatari by the ankles, yanking his legs out from under him as he was sent to the ground. Landing on his back at Naruto's feet, Hayatari started coughing between short gasps of air after having the wind knocked out of him, Naruto backing off to let him catch his breath and get back up. Looks like he's been practicing a couple actual move sets. Kurenai mumbled curiously, deepizing Naruto's fighting style as well. He doesn't normally fight like that. He's been trying to learn a lot of different things recently. I'm not surprised he'd look into different kinds of taijutsu as well. Shinobu commented in return as she loosely crossed her arms under her bust, a couple of her recently named Kamikeichu randomly scurrying about on her body. Having had Naruto hybridize as many of her Kakeichu as possible just days ago, Shinobu now had an actual collection of roughly 400 pincer mod insects housed in the resin pack she wore. Aijeki hadn't been a fluke, they were all identical to it and were unusually active busybodies, kind of like some species of ant, a couple almost always crawling around the outside of their small hive, or crawling around somewhere on her body under her trench coat. I wonder how good he really is at Taijutsu. Just going by instinct, he was already hard to fight even when outnumbered, so I wonder just how much stronger he's become, now that he knows a few Taijutsu katas. I thought you two sparred all the time. Kurenai mumbled curiously, glancing at her lone female student just as Shinobu's insects began to buzz quietly in reaction to her quickened heart rate. She really had been paying attention to them after all. We do, but that's because he's been helping me get better at it. Shinobu admitted with a touch of humility. She knew she wasn't all that good at it, she didn't need to with her Kakeichu and now her Kamikeichu to help her. Foolish thinking, she knew that for sure, already knowing it would be best if she kept her skills more well-rounded, just in case she ever encountered someone that could render her entire colony useless or destroyed. Being so unpredictable and having a blade-tipped tail, he's the best sparring partner I could have. He's fast, instinctual, strong, and his tail could be seen as an enemy's sword or weapon. If I ever have to fight unarmed without even my insects to assist me, I want to be able to defend myself or others properly. Smart thinking. Kurenai acknowledged with a slight nod, looking back at the spar as Naruto stayed on the defensive, doing his best to deflect, parry, and dodge the Hokage's deceptively dangerous fast-moving hands. Now that she paid attention more closely, Kurenai could see signs of him doing the same with Hayatari, training him. He wasn't being forced on the defensive, like she thought. Instead, he was keeping Hayatari on the offensive, something the wide-eyed boy had always been a little weak on. He wasn't much for fighting or conflict, but he was more than strong enough to defend himself, if need be. Attacking, though, he'd always been hesitant or nervous, never really committing to his attacks. Not fully, at least. She had to admit, Naruto was very interesting. Her old nervousness and intimidation of him had died off long ago, now replaced with a touch of pride and respect for him. He did not act like the monster he appeared to be, he treated and took care of his teammates, as if they were like family to him, and he had endured hardships that would have left even herself in pretty bad shape, and yet he still kept going forward. Not only that, but he was proving himself to be on par with a clan prodigy, having grown enough in skill to give his teammates tips on certain things, or show them different tricks to make something more effective, some sleight of hand having been something he'd helped teach them. Granted, he'd had her a little nervous with his random fainting spells early on, but he hadn't spaced out like that ever since the day before they left for Wave Country. HSS. Hissing quietly with irritants, Naruto curled his tail around his waist protectively, having had a couple of his tenketsu in the prehensile limb closed after a minor lapse in judgment. The boy was getting better. He'd actually been trying not to get hit for a good portion of the fight's third round. He'd been distracted by Hayatari's right hand while the boy struck out with his left at the same time, hitting a couple chakra points on it to slow its whip-like movements. Smirking faintly, Naruto shook his head a little bit, honestly surprised that Hayatari's feint had actually worked on him. Slipping back into his stance as Hayatari stood back up and did the same, Naruto took a deep breath, letting it out in a long quiet hiss. HSSSSSS. Don't you sass me. You deserve it for constantly grabbing me with it. Hayatari retorted while getting into his Gyuken stance, neither caring nor knowing if Naruto had actually been trying to say something. He'd seen Naruto talk with his scary-looking pet a bunch of times and could only assume it was their language or whatever. A few seconds later, he rushed Naruto once again, his hands darting forward to jab at his teammate's tenketsu once more. Holding the rubber-like wedge of hollowed-out resin, Naruto bit down on the object, making sure that all 8 of his fangs pierced the collector he'd made to harvest his own venom. As the black fluid that was his genetically mutating venom filled the hollow reservoir inside of it, it began to drain into a clear plastic tube that fed into a pint-sized glass flask, still being close to half full. Since he'd first started harvesting his venom for his studies, Naruto had noticed how the gland it originated from was replenishing it more and more often. Now, he could replenish a full dose of his venom within 3 to 4 days. He had been experimenting a little bit more in the past 2 months since creating the hunters, who now numbered closer to 3 dozen. Finishing after a minute or two, Naruto pulled his fangs free of the soft resin mold before setting the collector aside. Grabbing one of the few syringes that had been amongst the things in the scroll the Sandaime had given him in the past, Naruto filled it with roughly a half dose of his venom before walking over to where he had a rather large bat restrained on the examination table nearby. Ignoring its panic screeches, Naruto carefully pressed the needle into the animal's body, injecting it with the black secretion. Its screeches faded away after a few minutes, losing consciousness for the moment as its body started transforming. First, what little fur it had was lost, its skin taking on the same oily black sheen as his own. Other than its head and face, not much else changed about it appearance-wise, something that made Naruto frown curiously at as he undid the creature's restraints. After another minute or two, the hybridized bat slowly woke back up, sluggishly rolling back over and holding itself up with its lightly shaky winged arms, the membrane going from its elbows, the tips of its long and thin fingers. Where its wrists were anatomically located, the new hybrid bore a set of 2 black talons on either one, its feet equipped with 3 sickle-like talons each. Curiously enough, it didn't possess much of a tail, looking not unlike an actual bat's, not even possessing a tail blade of any sort. He also found it interesting how part of its head had formed 2 flat horn-like growths near its fang-filled mouth, looking not unlike its original nose. It also only had 2 small dorsal tubes on the backs of its shoulders. As it was, standing on its short legs and the clawed wrists of its winged arms, the hybridized bat looked to be only about 3 feet long from its nose to its feet, but its wingspan was nearly 6.5 feet across, maybe a little more. HSS Skria. The bat hissed before screeching softly, its head bobbing ever so slightly, as if it were sniffing him despite its lack of a nose. Quietly shrieking again, the bat took off from the examination table briefly before clinging to the ceiling, slowly crawling around a little bit. "You're going to be my eyes in the sky for a little bit. I think you'll come in handy very soon." Naruto idly mused while reaching up, his clawed fingers just barely reaching the hybridized bat as he gently pet the back of its head with his knuckles. Unlike the other Xenomorphs in the hive, himself and Haku excluded, it didn't have the same oblong head. Not exactly, at least. It was only about half as long as it would have been in comparison to a warrior's, while its neck came up along the back of it to keep it pointed forward for the most part, allowing its head a limited range of motion. Not having eyes or any real need to move its head outside of attacking or eating, Naruto was a little intrigued by how it had adapted, technically. Thinking about the Chunin selection exams that they'd been nominated for by Kurenai, Naruto grimaced slightly. Deciding to title the new artificially created caste seekers, he couldn't help smirking slightly, thinking of how Shinobu had named her first Kumakechu Ukayajeki for its pincer-like mouth. If he allowed himself such tiny pleasures, he'd name the first hunter he'd made Tsum, due to its claws, while the newly made seeker would be named Kyukatsuki, after the species of bat it had come from. Kyukatsuki could become very valuable to him, both during the exams and afterwards. HSS hissing quietly as he reached up more fully, Naruto watched as Kyukatsuki reached out to grab his forearm before climbing down to his shoulder. Situating itself on his back and pressing up against him, Naruto glanced over his shoulder at it, smirking faintly. Its large wings easily compressed, streamlining its flanks as it gripped the back of his shoulders with its 4-finger claws, its feet gripping his lower back. So long as it didn't move or anything, he could easily pass it off as either some kind of growth on his back or possibly a bag of some sort. He just couldn't use his dorsal tubes with the seeker there, and he'd have to be mindful of his actions. He had faith that the seeker would move freely and take flight if things started getting rough, but one wrong move and it could easily be killed if he fell on it, got hit unexpectedly from behind, or was slammed back against a wall or some other solid surface. Even still, knowing about it was valuable, it would make transporting one easier until he could get the summoning contract set up. Walking back over to the island counter he'd been at earlier, Naruto picked up his old hooded cloak, grimacing slightly as he stared down at it. Slowly putting it on over the seeker on his back, Naruto buttoned it up with his arm slid through the sleeves. Naruto grabbed the now pitch black hunter nin mask he used to wear just 6 months ago, now bearing the fanged snarling grin of a Xenomorph painted across the mouth section in white. "Time to go meet the team." Naruto mumbled quietly to himself as the watch in his pocket started beeping quietly, having set an alarm for when he had to go meet with Shinobu and Hayatari. He'd been needing it more and more as he unintentionally got lost in his studies and researched, often losing track of time. Heading for the nearest exit, Naruto kept his tail coiled around his waist under the cloak, intending to keep his appearance hidden for as long as possible throughout the exams. It would keep anyone from seeing what he has or what he looks like, leaving everything about him unknown to any possible enemies. Information was power, after all, and he was going to need every advantage he could get in the Chunin exams. So this part ends here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so quickly like this video for second part of this series. And comment down below your thoughts about this series. And now it's time for me to go, bye.